Kellan Merrick was the brain, cold, calculating, always 10 steps ahead. Davor Merrick was the brawn, reckless, brutal, and terrifyingly unpredictable. Together, they built a criminal empire that turned Warrington into a town ruled by silence, fear, and blood. But when a 19-year-old girl vanished without a trace, the brothers' carefully constructed world began to crumble, and their darkest secrets finally clawed to the surface. In the town of Warrington, tucked between the industrial arteries of the Northwest, two brothers slowly carved their names into the town's darkest chapters. Kellan and Davor Merrick were not born into violence, but by the time they reached their late teens, they had transformed themselves into local legends, silent threats that lived among the working-class neighborhoods and cobbled alleyways. Kellan, the elder, always moved like a man with a plan. He had a chill to him that made even seasoned criminals cautious. Davor, by contrast, thrived in chaos. He was impulsive and aggressive, with a taste for adrenaline and destruction. Together, they formed a bond that no one could break, and no one dared challenge. Their criminal journey began with petty theft, shoplifting small electronics and reselling them in backstreet deals. It didn't take long for them to scale up. Kellan saw opportunity in an abandoned scrapyard on the edge of town and used it as a base to run stolen car operations. They would strip high-end vehicles for parts, repaint stolen sedans, and alter VINs with remarkable precision. At first, it looked like another case of two troubled youths taking a wrong turn. But it was much more than that. It was the beginning of something calculated, something built to last. By age 20, Kellan had made enough money to purchase properties through shell companies. He recruited trusted faces from the local boxing gym and offered cash in handwork, no questions asked. One of the first was Rafe Gillsby, a former amateur fighter with a criminal record and a chip on his shoulder. He became Kellan's enforcer, often used to intimidate or clean up messes. Davor, meanwhile, was the face of their underground gambling and nightclub scene. He was loud, flashy, and craved attention, traits that made people fear him even more. Drugs soon followed. What began as small deals in pub toilets turned into a complex operation with links stretching to Liverpool and Manchester. They trafficked cocaine, MDMA, and prescription pills using teenagers as runners and single mothers as stash holders. The Merrick brothers never touched the product themselves. They stayed clean, both literally and legally, ensuring nothing could tie them to the street-level transactions. Their ability to remain in the shadows only deepened their control. People started disappearing. A rival gang leader named Maxon Doyle was last seen arguing with Davor in a bar parking lot. Weeks later, his body turned up in a reservoir, weighted down by concrete. No witnesses, no charges. Another man, thought to have skimmed money from one of Kellan's nightclubs, was found barely alive in the woods with broken fingers and both knees shattered. He refused to name his attackers. Fear was their strongest weapon. People learned quickly. Cross the Merricks, and you vanish. The brothers expanded their reach by forming alliances with crews in nearby towns. They avoided turf wars by offering financial incentives to those who stayed in line. If someone pushed back, they were dealt with quietly. Kellan, always the strategist, invested in fake security companies and event planning firms to launder cash. Davor continued managing their growing presence in Warrington's nightlife, where underage girls were exploited and illegal deals were struck behind VIP curtains. Yet through all this, their public images remained relatively clean. They sponsored local football teams, donated to food banks, and posed for photos at community events. Some even admired them, seeing them as self-made men who had beaten the odds. But behind the smiles were fists, guns, and silence bought with terror. Police had their suspicions, but never enough to make anything stick. Surveillance operations failed. Informants went missing. The Merrick name became untouchable. Then came a subtle shift. A young woman named Neesha Varn, just 19, vanished after attending a private party linked to one of their clubs. At first, no one paid attention. It was easy to believe a teen had run off. But those who knew her insisted she wasn't that kind of girl. Her face on missing posters became a daily reminder that something wasn't right. And though the brothers acted like nothing had happened, the town had begun to whisper. For the first time in years, cracks were forming in the foundation of fear the Merrick brothers had built. What no one knew was that this single disappearance would become the thread that unraveled the entire empire. Neesha Varn's disappearance didn't spark immediate alarm in the beginning. Young people had vanished before, especially around the nightlife scene where drink, drugs, and blurred memories often left trails cold. But something about Neesha's case was different. She wasn't reckless. She didn't drink heavily. She wasn't involved with gangs, and she was known for her discipline and quiet nature. Her family, especially her older brother Milan, pushed hard for answers. They distributed flyers, posted on social media, and begged local news outlets to cover her story. As her face spread across Warrington, quiet unease began to stir in the community. Some suspected she'd simply run off, but others began to connect dots that no one had dared touch. Then, 23 days after she vanished, a sealed envelope arrived at the Warrington police station. Inside was a battered old burner phone, its battery half dead and casing cracked. The phone contained a single video file. It opened with static, then a dimly lit back seat of a vehicle. In the grainy footage, Neesha could be seen lying motionless, her face pale and her arm slumped to the side. A male voice in the background was barely audible over muffled bass from a car stereo. And then, an unmistakable detail emerged. A heavily tattooed arm with a dagger and barbed wire ink, stretching down the forearm, reached across the screen. That tattoo was infamous on the streets. It belonged to Davor Merrick. With that clip, the entire investigation shifted, though the footage lacked full clarity. And Neesha's fate wasn't definitively captured. The implications were damning. The SUV matched the description of one linked to a property owned by a shell company tied to the Merrick brothers. The registration, while switched, had been seen on a CCTV camera near the club on the night Neesha vanished. But it wasn't enough to make arrests. Kellan and Davor had lawyers on retainer and knew how to stay several steps ahead. Without a body, without direct evidence, it was still just suspicion. Pressure grew from the public. The town was no longer willing to stay silent. Anonymous calls started flooding the tip line, some worthless, others cryptic. One in particular stood out. A voice-modulated caller claimed Neesha had been taken to the old canal lock near Fiddler's Ferry, a site abandoned years ago. Police arrived with dogs and forensic teams. There was no body, but in the mud near the water's edge, they found a delicate silver bracelet engraved with Neesha's name. It was partially buried beneath tire tracks. Blood on the clasp confirmed the worst. Neesha had been hurt, and she had been there. Inside the Merrick camp, tension grew. Though they maintained their public calm, privately the walls were closing in. Davor became more erratic, lashing out at subordinates and demanding they sweep every inch of the club for listening devices. He was convinced someone on the inside was leaking information. Kellan, more composed, instructed his team to tighten their routines and erase anything that could be traced. They began moving meetings to remote locations, using rotating vehicles and new phones every week, but fear had started creeping in. One person had already begun distancing herself, Talia Reeve. For years, she had been the Merrick's trusted messenger and handler, working behind the scenes to pay off informants, coordinate deals, and manage their business fronts. But Neesha's case shook her. She remembered the girl. She had seen her that night, sitting alone, texting, wearing that same bracelet now found in the mud. Talia didn't know what happened after the party, but she knew who was involved, and the guilt started eating at her. Meanwhile, police intensified their investigation. They revisited every angle, interviewed party guests, traced burner phones, monitored financial transactions. Surveillance operations were reopened. Davor's aggression and paranoia only made him more visible. But the Merrick brothers remained untouched, shielded by a code of silence enforced through fear and violence. Unbeknownst to them, one of their longest-standing allies had already made a decision. Rafe Gilsby, bruised by years of loyalty and haunted by his own children's faces, had started documenting what he knew. He used an old voice recorder hidden inside his gym bag, detailing meetings, names, routes, and secrets he had carried for too long. He never told a soul, not even Talia. It was insurance. Or maybe redemption. The disappearance of one young girl had started a chain reaction. In the shadows of Warrington's criminal empire, trust began to crack. Every glance felt suspicious. Every silence was dangerous. And though the Merrick brothers still walked the streets freely, their grip was weakening. The city was no longer just watching. It was preparing to act. Rafe Gilsby had spent over a decade as the Merrick brothers' most loyal enforcer. His presence alone had silenced many before a punch was ever thrown. Rafe had been with them when they were stealing cars in the dead of night, and stayed by their side as their empire grew from scrapyards to nightclubs and drug dens. But something shifted in him after Neesha's face started showing up everywhere, on lampposts, shop windows, and news screens. He had daughters of his own, girls barely younger than Neesha, and every time he saw that missing poster, something inside him hardened. He knew Davor had something to do with it. He also knew there were more secrets buried than anyone realized. At first, Rafe tried to keep his distance, skipping meetings and limiting conversations, but that only raised suspicion. Davor, always the hothead, began asking pointed questions and dropping veiled threats. Kellan remained silent, watching from a distance with that calculating stare he had always used when someone was being sized up. Rafe knew he didn't have long. That's when he started documenting everything he could. Quietly, methodically. He used an old voice recorder from his boxing days and kept it in a zipped pouch under the seat of his car. He narrated addresses, amounts, deals, names of buyers, and every violent act he had witnessed or been forced to commit. It wasn't a confession. It was a final move in case he didn't make it out alive. But Rafe wasn't the only one growing uneasy. Talia Reeve, once the trusted middlewoman between the brothers and their many shady contacts, had also started to unravel. She'd lived in their world too long. The late-night calls, the bags of cash, the constant fear. It was wearing her thin. She had seen Neesha at the club that night. She remembered watching her walk into the VIP lounge, laughing nervously with a friend. An hour later, only Davor had come back down. Talia didn't ask questions, but in her gut she knew something had happened. Since then, she'd started keeping copies of things: bank transfers, surveillance clips, client ledgers. Like Rafe, she was building a quiet archive, unsure whether it was for justice or survival. Inside the Merrick circle, paranoia spread like poison. Davor's behavior became more erratic. He started tailing his own men, running random searches of the club's staff, and interrogating anyone who had been out of sight too long. One night, he showed up unannounced at Rafe's flat, demanding to talk. Rafe played it cool, pretending nothing was wrong. But that night, Davor went through Rafe's car while he was distracted. He found the recorder. It only had part of a conversation saved, but it was enough to confirm the betrayal. Rafe disappeared the next morning. When his body was pulled from the canal a week later, wrapped in chains and missing 2 fingers, there was no official statement, but everyone knew who had done it. His death sent a message that loyalty had limits, and betrayal had consequences. But the message backfired. Talia, already on edge, panicked. She was next, and she knew it. Before anyone could stop her, she cleaned out her flat, erased all her accounts, and vanished. But not before mailing a package to an address she had memorized months ago. A detective she once overheard had taken personal interest in Neesha's case. Inside the padded envelope was a USB drive and a letter. The USB held evidence no one had yet seen. Hidden camera footage from inside the VIP lounge at the club the night Neesha disappeared. A time-stamped log of money transfers made to shell companies. A grainy video showing Davor, half-drunk, dragging a limp figure down a hallway. It wasn't definitive proof of murder, but it was enough to break the case wide open. The police, long frustrated by dead ends, now had something real. They began linking the Merricks to more than just Neesha. Surveillance resumed. Wires were planted, phones tapped. The operation moved fast, and this time they didn't stop at warrants. They dug into every connection, every dollar, every associate. The fall had begun. The brothers didn't know who to trust anymore. Their empire, once protected by silence and fear, had been infiltrated from within. And what started with a missing girl and a shaken conscience was now an all-out collapse of everything they'd built. The evidence Talia Reeve provided was more than just a crack in the Merrick empire. It was a wrecking ball. As soon as investigators verified the files on the USB, Operation Deep Lock was launched in total secrecy. The police knew better than to give the brothers a head start. The footage alone didn't guarantee convictions, but when matched with bank records, digital messages, and witness interviews that followed, a web of criminal activity began to take form. They had names, dates, and payments, laundered money, drug shipments, assault victims, and most damning of all, movement logs placing Davor and Kellan at locations connected to Neesha Varn's disappearance. The raids came suddenly. Before dawn, marked and unmarked units swarmed the known Merrick properties. The scrapyard, once their car theft headquarters, was surrounded by tactical units. Several men were arrested on the spot, and inside, officers found a concealed basement under a rusted storage container. In it were black duffel bags full of unregistered handguns, burner phones, and what appeared to be a blood-stained tarpaulin. Meanwhile, Kellan was tracked to a private villa on the outskirts of town. He had recently distanced himself from street-level operations, choosing instead to live among the wealthy in a gated estate. But no security system could protect him now. Officers breached the villa during an illegal poker game. Kellan was calm, composed as ever, dressed in silk and holding a cigar. He offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led out. His expression never changed. Not surprise, not anger, just quiet awareness. It was as if he had always known this moment would come. Davor, however, was a different story. He had sensed the heat weeks earlier and had taken refuge with one of their remaining allies, a gunrunner in the outskirts of Liverpool. But his time was up. After tracking phone activity and intercepted messages, police located him trying to smuggle himself out in the back of a refrigerated lorry. He was curled beneath crates of meat, shivering, and holding a pistol that jammed when he tried to use it. His arrest was quick and messy. He screamed, fought, and spat blood at the officers. But it was over. Simultaneously, 15 others were arrested across Warrington, Manchester, and Cheshire. Drivers, dealers, accountants, enforcers, and old allies who once thought their ties to the Merricks were invisible. Dozens of properties were searched. Several vehicles, including the black SUV from the video, were found hidden in underground garages, their interiors chemically scrubbed, but not enough to erase everything. Forensic experts found traces of Neesha's DNA in one of them, along with 3 other partial profiles still being analyzed. As the news broke, Warrington went into shock. The story dominated headlines. People who once feared the Merricks now gathered outside the police station, holding candles for Neesha and other victims. Some cheered. Others wept. Shop owners who had been extorted for years started coming forward, providing receipts, CCTV footage, and old threats they had recorded but never dared report. The fear that had kept the town silent for years was finally lifting. The legal process moved quickly. The prosecution had compiled hundreds of pages of evidence, financial records, testimonies, surveillance, and most crucially Talia's files. She had vanished into witness protection, her location a tightly guarded secret. But her voice echoed through courtrooms as she gave remote testimony under a pseudonym, detailing years of laundering and witnessing violent cover-ups. Her account tied together every loose thread. Kellan and Davor were tried separately. Kellan's defense was one of denial and manipulation. He painted himself as a businessman unfairly targeted. But the paper trail betrayed him. Davor's trial was more explosive. The jury was shown enhanced clips from the USB, including a clearer frame of him dragging Neesha's limp body, matched with GPS and phone pings. There were gasps in the courtroom. Davor was visibly agitated, muttering under his breath, slamming his fists on the table. It was clear. He wasn't just guilty, he was unraveling. Despite their reputations, despite the years they had controlled Warrington with an iron grip, the walls had finally closed in. The Merrick brothers were no longer feared rulers of a hidden empire. They were inmates awaiting sentencing, their secrets spilled, their power stripped. And yet, for all the chaos they caused, one haunting question remained unanswered. Where was Neesha's body? Justice was being served, but closure still waited in the shadows. With the Merrick brothers behind bars and their criminal network in pieces, Warrington began its long, uneven journey toward recovery. Streets once patrolled by fear now echoed with cautious relief. Local businesses started operating without the silent taxes the brothers once enforced. The pubs that had served as drop points were sold or shuttered. For the first time in over a decade, people could breathe without looking over their shoulders. But beneath the surface, the damage lingered. Kellan Merrick was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. His trial had been clean, methodical, and damning. The evidence was airtight, and his cold, detached demeanor only reinforced the image of a man who had orchestrated years of violence without blinking. Davor, on the other hand, was another story. His courtroom behavior bordered on manic. He lashed out during proceedings, cursed at witnesses, and even tried to attack a guard during sentencing. He received 2 consecutive life terms. The judge called him a menace to society with no regard for human life. Neither brother showed remorse. Neither apologized. But neither would walk free again. The trial sent a ripple through the remnants of their crew. Some tried to distance themselves quickly. Others were caught in the cleanup, arrested on minor charges that had suddenly become part of a bigger puzzle. The silence that had protected the gang for so long had crumbled. With the Merricks gone, no one wanted to inherit the throne, but the vacuum they left behind was too tempting to remain empty. Within months, whispers of a new group began circulating, young, reckless, and dangerous. They called themselves M-Line, a vague nod to the Merrick name. Police believed the group was led by Leo Henders, a teenager rumored to be Davor's illegitimate son. He had the same fire, the same unpredictability, but none of the strategic patience Kellan once possessed. He posted cryptic threats online, referencing unfinished business and hinting at revenge. Though smaller and far less organized, M-Line quickly gained attention, pulling in vulnerable youth and reawakening old fears. For Neesha Varn's family, justice had come in a courtroom, but not at home. Her body was never recovered. Search teams combed canals, woods, and construction sites, but no final resting place was ever found. Every time remains were discovered anywhere in the region, her name resurfaced in the headlines. Her mother, Ania, refused to give up hope completely. She believed someone still knew the truth. She believed closure was being withheld, not by the courts, but by silence. Her brother Milan became an activist, launching a community program for missing girls and exploited youth. He swore he'd never let Neesha's name fade into history. Talia Reeve, whose evidence had brought down the empire, remained hidden. Rumors about her surfaced online. Some claimed she had moved abroad. Others said she'd changed her identity entirely. She became a ghost, even to those who once worked alongside her. Yet her contribution remained vital. Her voice replayed in interviews and documentaries about the case. She had chosen survival over silence, and in doing so, helped bring justice to a town that had long forgotten what justice felt like. Warrington itself remained scarred. The Merricks had cast a long, dark shadow that didn't vanish with handcuffs and cell bars. Generations had grown up under their rule, and erasing that legacy wasn't easy. But change was visible. A mural of Neesha was painted across the side of an old community center, a vibrant reminder of innocence lost, and a symbol of strength for what remained. Candlelight vigils became annual events. Victims once voiceless found the courage to speak. Still, not everything was resolved. A confidential report circulated within police circles suggested the Merricks had stashed over £2 million in offshore accounts. The money was never found. Some believed it was buried. Others thought it was transferred digitally through cryptocurrency wallets using dead identities. If it existed, it could fund another empire. And that idea kept detectives awake at night. The fall of Kellan and Davor Merrick had ended an era of terror in Warrington. But in their wake, they left fractured lives, unanswered questions, and a chilling reminder that crime doesn't die. It evolves. And somewhere, perhaps just beyond sight, someone was already preparing to step into the shadows they left behind.